Hi, everyone. My name is Dorothy, and I want to share my incredible and terrifying story with you. There wasn't anything supernatural or mystical in my life until I found out that I died 2 months ago. What's this? A soul wandering after death or someone's cruel joke? Or maybe I had a twin sister with exactly the same information. Let me start at the beginning. I could call my life calm and simple until I turned 12 years old. That is until a moment when we moved to another state because of my parents' jobs. We had to exchange the familiar and cozy Denver for Atlanta. And from that moment on, everything went wrong. It wasn't anything like it used to be or like I wanted it to be. Yes, it was warmer, sunnier, and simpler here, but that wasn't what I needed. The fact is that here I had no friends at all. Every time I tried to make a new friend was a total disaster. The locals and I were just too different. We were incompatible. I never thought that geography could influence people's personalities and behavior, but I saw it for myself. Basically, after the move, I became lonely and withdrawn. However, after a couple of months, I managed to make my first friend in Atlanta named Liz. I can't say that we were kindred spirits and we were united by something. Not at all. It was just that Liz also moved here from Denver, and because of that, she seemed close and dear to me. I had no doubt that I too evoked similar feelings in her. But about a month after Liz and I became friends, something strange happened. She started picking at me whenever I talked and constantly teased and ridiculed me, and then she started pulling mean pranks on me. For example, one time she put a spider on my plate, knowing how terrified I am of spiders. That was very cruel, I think, because jokes should be nice and make you smile, not make you afraid. After a few weeks of her treating me that way, I couldn't stand it anymore. The last straw came when Liz and I went to the movies during one scene. I whispered to her that I liked one of the actors and I wouldn't mind becoming his girlfriend. And you know what my so-called friend did? She stood up and shouted to the whole audience, "Hey, everybody! This girl's in love with Harry, the hero of the film. How smart do you think she is if she thinks she has a chance with a celebrity?" And laughed. Burning with shame, I ran out of the theater and never spoke to Liz again. I went back to being lonely. Better to be alone than to be friends with just anyone, I decided. I, of course, ran into Liz, but often I ignored her. She constantly bullied me and came up with all sorts of mean schemes. She said various nasty things about me to my classmates to turn them against me. Plus, she wrote nasty things on the walls of my house and trolled me on social media. She was complete trash. I didn't understand how I could become friends with this crazy girl and prayed that she would leave me alone. Fortunately, my parents sympathized with my problem and said that we had the opportunity to move. Again, but this time not very far away, just to New Orleans. I was extremely happy and agreed without a second thought. It took a couple weeks to get ready, and then we set off for a new life. This time, I vowed to be careful when choosing friends and not just let anyone into my world. Bitter experiences had taught me that the last thing I wanted was a repeat of the Liz situation. In the new town, things were about the same as in Atlanta. I had absolutely nothing in common with the local teenagers, so I learned to enjoy being alone and tried to devote more time to self-improvement. But soon, another shock awaited me. I was walking home from school, and on the street, I met Liz. Terror and panic seized me. How did she get here? And what did she want? She smiled maliciously, looking at me, and said that I had done a very bad thing by leaving her there in Atlanta. She said that I should have warned her about my move. Of course, she said all this, mocking me. At that moment, I realized I was dealing not just with a bad person, but with someone who was truly unstable and unpredictable. I hastily ran home and immediately told my parents everything. They were as scared as I was and immediately went to the police, who promised to deal with Liz. In the meantime, they told me to switch to distance learning and advised me not to leave the house without an escort. I completely agreed to those measures because no one knew what Liz might decide to do before she got taken into custody, and I had nothing to lose anyway. I didn't have any friends waiting for me outside of the house. However, after a couple weeks, my parents shocked me with another piece of news. They said they were moving again that day and I had no choice but to follow them. But this time I was very happy about it because I wanted to get away from Liz as soon as possible and try to start over from scratch. After this move, though, my parents began to behave very strangely. For example, they told me I couldn't talk to any of my old friends or classmates in Denver. They took all my electronics away from me and said that it had to be that way. It wouldn't always be that way. I would just have to put up with it for now. I started thinking the worst. I was sure it had to do with Liz. Maybe she wanted to kill me. Anything's possible. So I listened to my parents and completely isolated myself. Time began to drag on extremely slowly, and out of boredom, I was ready to howl at the moon like a loner wolf. I had no idea that I had become so dependent on the internet and social media. Because of this, I began to fall into a depression. The days blended together and I stopped counting them. I plunged into a completely dull, empty state and didn't know how long it would be before I got out of it, because my parents wouldn't tell me when it was going to end. Finally, after a while had passed, I couldn't stand it anymore and decided to find my phone while my parents weren't home. It turned out to be harder than I thought. I was very surprised that my mother hid my phone so carefully. It was very strange. Then I turned on my phone and first of all decided to go to my Instagram. And what I saw there was shocking. On my personal account, there were a bunch of sorrowful messages from my friends and former classmates from Denver, sending my parents their condolences. Under my photos, there were comments about how kind and good I was while I was alive. God, that was the worst thing that ever happened to me. I was in a state of deep shock and couldn't believe my eyes. Of course, first of all, I wanted to write to everyone that it was all nonsense that I was alive. But no, I decided to go the other way and figure it out. I mean, I had no doubt that Liz was behind this entire performance. So I registered a new fake account and wrote to one of my friends asking where Dorothy was buried. That's me. And she immediately answered me without hesitation. So I headed there. When I arrived at the cemetery, I was seized with panic because a gravestone with my name, my date of birth, and the worst part, the date of my death, towered over my grave. It seemed that I had died 2 months before, though. Why would that be? I couldn't guess what a joke for Liz to make. Dang, she's messed up. I hurried home to tell my parents everything. They had been waiting for me for a long time and were very worried. But at the same time, Dad was very angry and annoyed, as if I had done something bad. "We agreed that you would stay home," he said with displeasure. And in order to justify myself, I told them that everyone considers me dead and that I saw my own grave. After these words, I couldn't hold back my tears, and my parents, instead of pitying me and comforting me, began to shout at me. Their reaction confused me even more. Yes, I took my phone without permission, went to my Instagram, and visited my grave. So what's really the reason to scold your daughter so harshly, yelling at the top of your lungs with hatred in your eyes? I just started sobbing even more, said that it would be better if what I saw in Denver was true, and only after that did my parents come to their senses. When we all calmed down a bit, I found out the truth. It turned out that when we were still living in Denver, my dad began to have serious business problems, and no less serious people began to demand money from him. At some point, Dad realized that he was at a dead end and a plan ripened in his head. He decided to stage the death of our family and start everything from scratch in a new place by forging documents. But our new life hadn't begun yet. Can you guess why? Of course, it was Liz. The fact that she was stalking us, and even worse, she knew everything, all because her father found out about the problems of my dad's business and witnessed our fictional death. He knew about everything and decided to blackmail my father, demanding a huge amount of money from him for his silence. And for extra persuasive power, he brought Liz with him, and she followed us everywhere, as if reminding my parents that they were surrounded on all sides. Fortunately, by this time, my dad had already settled all his problems, and he and Mom said that we can return to Denver to our usual life and tell everyone that we are alive. This was probably the best news I could have gotten, and Liz and her father were awaiting trial for harassment and blackmail. Would you be able to start life from scratch, cutting off all your old connections and contacts? Write your answers in the comments, like this video, and be sure to subscribe to our channel if for some reason you haven't done it yet. Hi, my name is Ty, and I can boast not only of the length of my hair, but also of the strength, as well as I can lift a bucket of water, a full shopping bag, or even my little brother with my hair. Can you imagine? I guess I could tell you my story from the beginning. Funny enough, but in my childhood, I cannot boast of my hair at all. I was born completely bald, and the hair which tried to grow on my head didn't look like hair at all. It was a chicken's fluff and nothing else. A pigtail of 3 hairs, a hairdo of 1 thin hair lock. My mom had to go through all this in my childhood. She knows everything about the sad life of a girl with thin hair like no one else. When I was 8 or 9 years old, my parents started banging the drum, being thrilled beyond measure. The fact was that early childhood had passed, but fluff instead of hair remained. And Mom kept making hairstyles for my thin hair, trying to hide the flaw, but it was getting worse as I grew up. Sometimes my classmates asked me where my hair was and why I looked so funny. To put it mildly, it was quite unpleasant. My mom didn't want me to have serious moral injuries, and therefore she began to use all the available methods to improve the quality and quantity of my hair. I was taken to doctors, healers, and even clairvoyants. In the meantime, my hair suffered a lot of manipulation. It was smeared, shaved, sprinkled, set on fire, and even epilated. And some of these procedures were very painful. All this went on for quite some time, and it probably would have never ended. But then a miracle happened. Or it was not a miracle. I was not quite sure about that. Well, it doesn't matter because at some point my hair began to grow by leaps and bounds, and it looked so thick and shiny, as if I was a princess from a fairy tale. So that epic with the torment of my head was over. Well, I thought. However, soon my hair began to grow like crazy, and it was a nightmare because it did not want to lie down nicely. Instead, my hair started to stick out in all different directions, and it was simply impossible to style it. Sometimes its length increased by 3 to 5 centimeters per day, and it was not very pleasant at all. Oops, it seemed that my mother had devoted too much effort to deal with my bald head, and her methods led to some kind of super results. And because of this, I had to start cutting my hair very often. Once or twice a week. That doesn't usually seem to be a problem, does it? But my hair still used to stick out in all directions, and I did not know how my next haircut would affect my hairstyle. I didn't know if I would look good in an onion or a pack of spaghetti. Once I was in a great hurry to school, so I had to run down the street. Running along the pedestrian crossing at a traffic light, I felt that my hair was caught on something, but since I was in a hurry, my reaction was delayed. In the end, when I stopped, it turned out that my hair pulled out the mirror from a huge truck that was standing at a traffic light. The mirror with pieces of iron. Can you imagine how strong the jerk should have been? You should have seen the faces of the passerbys and the truck driver. Looking at them, I immediately realized I had to run away from there as soon as possible. On the same day, I came home and began to do experiments on my hair. I jerked it with my hands, but I did not feel any pain. Then I hung bags of salt and dumbbells on it, pulled it with different strengths, but the results were the same. My hair withstood everything. I was very surprised by this because before my new hair grew, any slight pulling of my old hair caused me pain and hair loss, and how I felt as if a wig was glued to my head. Then I turned to my classmate Richie and told him about all the adventures of my hair. Well, in fact, I turned to him for a reason. I had a specific request. Richie was a very strong guy and had been involved in weightlifting for a long time. Therefore, I had a very non-standard request for him. I asked him to lift me by my hair. At first, Richie was categorically against the idea. He called me crazy and said that he would never do it. But then he agreed. In any case, he didn't have much choice because if I thought of something, I would definitely achieve my goal. I confess that I was afraid. All the time, I thought I would lose my hair completely or that I would be bald again because of my request, or perhaps that my scalp would come off and I would die. But still, I really wanted to finish what I had begun, and therefore there was no turning back. And Richie could change his mind at any moment, so there might not be another chance. Maybe you're wondering why I wanted to do that. I find it difficult to answer this question, but I suspect that it was a desire to somehow stand out from the crowd and prove my uniqueness. All my life, I was somewhere in the back rows, and now I wanted to catch up. The experiment began. Richie was sitting on a stepladder, and I had to go down gradually until the moment I ended up hanging on my hair. It turned out to be not difficult for me, and soon I was hanging from my hair. And at that moment, it didn't hurt at all. Then I decided that I needed to go further and hype while I could. Nobody knew what would happen next. What if my hair decided to crumble again? Guess what I decided to do? After 5 minutes of hurrying on my hair, my next step was to attempt to include in the Guinness Book. Well, why not? Moreover, I was completely sure about my success and applied for participation without a doubt. I informed the commission that I could move trucks and a hitch with my hair without using my hands. So all I had to do was prepare for the appointed date, and I began training. At first, I was able to move cars without difficulty, then trucks, buses, and even ships. Every day, I believed in myself more and more, and by the appointed day, I wasn't nervous at all. Members of the commission from the Guinness Book watched my warm-up, which consisted of waving pigtails in my head with interest, and then I started the main part of the process and tied my hair to 2 coupled trucks. And I had to not just move them, but also drag them 100 meters behind me within 10 minutes. Ready, get set, go! My path to fame and the absolute record began. I started walking slowly and even relaxed, but after a few seconds, Richie, who came to support me, shouted that at this rate I would not make it in 10 minutes, and this meant that I had to accelerate my steps. As soon as I started moving faster for the first time lately, I started to feel pain in my scalp. The tension in my hair began to hurt me terribly. However, I had a goal, and it was quite close and accessible, so I could not feel sorry for myself at that moment. Focus on the result, I said to myself and kept going. When most of the way was behind me, the pain became unbearable, but I continued to go, gritting my teeth, and then something terrible happened. My hair just came out of my head. I won't even try to describe to you how painful it was. I started screaming and crying, finally letting my emotions take over. Despair, pain, and resentment raged in me. I sat down on the ground, put my bald head in my hands, and looked at the finish line, which was only 10 meters away. Why didn't I dye my hair? Couldn't it just come off a little later? I was taken to the hospital, and then it turned out that my scalp and hair follicles were badly damaged. I needed a long and painful treatment during which I had to be completely bald. Recently, my hair began to grow back again, but like in childhood, it is sparse and thin and looks like a fluff now. I think that I made a big mistake intending to get into the Guinness Book. I had to take care of my hair instead. Would you like to move trucks with your hair? Write your answers in the comments, leave a like, and subscribe to our channel so as not to miss the release of new, interesting stories.